You noble diggers, all stand up now.
Welcome, comrade. Never forget the forms.
Professor Noam Chomsky is listed in anybody's catalog as among the half-dozen top heroes of the New Left. This standing he achieved by adopting over the past 2 or 3 years a series of adamant positions projecting at least American foreign policy, at most America itself. His essays and speeches are collected in his new book, American Power and the New Mandarins. Usually, Mr. Chomsky writes non-political books, for instance, Syntactic Structures in 1957, Cartesian Linguistics in 1966, and Topics in the Theory of Generative Grammar, 1965.
Hello and welcome to my channel. Today I will be affecting as though I were a wasp and a white Anglo-Saxon person, as to make a point, a performative point, as to listening to a speaker. You should always make sure that you are trying to understand what is their goal, what is their purpose. And when you hear a speaker affect with a monotone intonation, you can be sure that they are attempting to beguile you. They are attempting to persuade you, use you, and abuse you. This is why you should never listen to someone like Barack Obama. The style, the intonation is meant to obfuscate his beliefs. He slows his speech so he can engage with you and not with himself and the topic. All of that is prefigured. He is watching for landmines of democratic support, popular support, finance support, industrial support. He is a mirage. He is not there. Today we will be talking about Noam Chomsky versus William F. Buckley on firing line. We are doing this because Noam Chomsky needs to be buried as a thinker. He has come out in the Epstein files in a way that is unacceptable. And a viewer has pointed out rightly that even though I was focused on Lula da Silva and what he should do, and that I made an excuse that Chomsky should, there doesn't need to be a statement from him because of his advanced age, that this is incorrect. That I had a vulnerability and a penchant for entryist figures and popular leaders, and that this is because I believe that the pipeline is a tool, the pipeline to the left is a tool that can be used to divide and conquer the enemies of socialism. To make this example, I would never find Marx if it wasn't for Christopher Hitchens, and Christopher Hitchens is rightly seen as a devil on the left nowadays because of his support for the Iraq War, which was a holocaust of its own. I am also doing this affectation to make a point about what capitalism has done to the gestalt, to the general intelligence of the public. It is obvious that from throughout the interview, but in the beginning, there is William F. Buckley reading Noam Chomsky's selected works, the title of his selected works, and it is obvious that he struggles to comprehend what they are about and struggles to even spit their names out. This was not advanced material at its time, in my opinion. Chomsky's quest for a universal grammar was obviously mistaken, and that words are not real, that there is a mapping onto reality, and it was proven by variances in different linguistic groups and approach to language that are not amenable to an idea of a universal grammar. I expect every undergraduate to understand Chomsky and that line of thinking that I just put you through, and the general public does not. And they should. It should be in the popular imagination. It should be basic knowledge, that kind of inquiry. And we are so stultified and stunted by the infantilization that is brought on by capital, because capital will not reify genius. It will not allow competition near the top. It will not allow geniuses to push society forward. It needs submissive operators to its system. And Chomsky himself said that any academic in the mainstream is only there because he is submissive to the absurd. I have selected a number of clips from this show, and I will comment on them as they go by.
Mr. Chomsky writes, quote, by accepting the presumption of legitimacy of debate on certain issues such as this one has already lost one's humanity. I should like to begin by asking him why, under the circumstances, if by being here he stands to lose his humanity, he consented to appear in the first place.
Because, first of all, I didn't quite put it in those terms, I don't think. I think that but I think that I said that there are certain issues, for example, Auschwitz, such that by consenting to discuss them, one degrades oneself and to some degree loses one's humanity, and I think that that's true. Nevertheless, I can easily imagine circumstances in which I would have been glad to debate Auschwitz. For example, if there were some chance that by debating Auschwitz it might have been possible to eliminate it or to at least mitigate the horror of what was going on. And I feel the same way about Vietnam. And I really think that fundamentally there is no argument anymore at an intellectual level, in my opinion. But I think it's very important to discuss it nevertheless.
At what level is there an argument?
Well, there is a policy which I think is a destructive and devastating policy. It's continuing, and the continuation of the policy is, to some extent, based on the fact of public apathy or public acceptance. Hence, there still is the necessity to convince people that they should act strongly to put an end to this policy.
At what point was there an intellectual argument? At which point did an intellectual argument in favor of our intervening in Vietnam cease to exist?
Well, as I say there, I think that there may have been a time when there was something to debate. For example, I think that in the middle 50s, though I was opposed to the policy, and I think that it was right to be opposed to it, nevertheless, I think it was a debatable issue in a sense in which it is no longer a debatable issue.
Why is that?
Because at the moment I think it's really an issue of the survival of the existence of Vietnam as an entity, as a social and cultural entity. I think that's what's at stake.
But even that could be intellectually argued, couldn't it?
Well, in the same sense in which Auschwitz could be intellectually argued.
No, I mean in a different sense.
No, I think in the same sense. In fact, don't forget there were people who argued in favor of Auschwitz and gave...
No, I haven't gotten that at all. I hadn't had any such on this program, nor do I intend to. But it seems to me that even if what you said were correct, there could be a perfectly legitimate argument over, for instance, the continuation of the state of Anguilla, or the continuation of the state of Biafra, or the continuation of the state of Goa.
I didn't talk about the existence of the state. I talked about the existence of the society as a social and cultural entity. I think that's what's at stake.
Oh, okay. Well, if it's at stake, mightn't there be 2 points of view about how to help it evolve into its natural forms, right?
Oh, there are many different points of view. I think they're very legitimate.
Well, now how can you say
they're very legitimate? They're very legitimate issues that can be argued as to how the United States ought to most efficaciously put an end to its destructive actions in Vietnam. There are many different alternatives that might be thought about.
But one way, of course, to put an end to America's necessary intervention is to conclude the war successfully. That's a way.
Yeah,
right?
one possible way is by destroying Vietnam, which I think is probably the most likely outcome.
Yeah. Well, now, for instance, one way in which we put an end to the Nazi occupation of France was by destroying Nazi Germany, correct?
That's right.
Yeah. It seems to me that this was a position which is a tenable position. And mutatis mutandis, it's a tenable position today.
No, because mutatis mutandis changes everything in this case.
Explain to me why.
Because in this case...
As you know, it's not only but people with whom I disagree, like Arthur Schlesinger, Jr., who refers to your theological certitudes and your liberal...
Confessions of guilt can be very good therapy, as they can, as is well known. They're also very good preventative to action. And I think one should be very wary of that. In fact, if I remember...
Well, I think we should.
I have some remarks about that.
I think that your formulation of it is at least saintly. But it still is dislocating, at least, to people who fancy themselves as spending an equal amount of time attempting to refine their whole apparatus of moral discrimination and who come up with conclusions directly at variance with your own. Now, the reason I haven't asked you at this moment to say, you know, why are we in Vietnam and so on and so forth is because we've been all arguing about this for 4, 5, 6 years, and the chances of our coming up with anything, especially new, are small.
Right. Yeah, that's one of the respects in which I think it is sort of an unarguable issue. Now, you know, the issues have just, one has been over them over and over and over again.
Yeah. But there are perhaps certain aspects of the quarrel in Vietnam that touch especially on your thesis and your concern and the whole nature of it. And that is the suspicion that some people have of a double standard, of selective indignation. For instance, you refer to the heroic Vietnamese resistance to American power.
I think it's absolutely heroic.
Yeah, sure.
Amazing.
Now, plus, in the course of the evening. But the reason I do raise this, and I rejoice in your disposition to argue the Vietnam question, especially when I recognize what an act of self-control this must involve.
It does.
Sure.
It really does. I mean, I think that this is the kind of issue
You're doing very
where
well.
you know, sometimes I lose my temper. Maybe not tonight.
Maybe not tonight. Because if you would, I'd smash you in the goddamn face. You say in your book,
good reason for not losing my temper.
You say the war is simply an obscenity, a depraved act by weak and miserable men.
Including all of us, including myself,
Well,
including that's the next sentence, same sentence.
Sure, because you count everybody in the company of the guilty.
I think that's true in this case.
Yeah, but
see, one of the points I was trying
sense of
on the feelings that I have, which I've just expressed, you know, and which you perceive, I should be doing really strong things, which I don't think I am doing. So there's no sense of moral superiority, and I'm not interested in simply, you know, throwing blame around or giving people marks. I think that the beginning of wisdom in this case is to recognize something about what we stand for in the world, what we're doing in the world. And I think when we do recognize that, we will feel an enormous sense of guilt. And I say somewhere in there that one should be very careful not to let confessions of guilt overcome the possibility of action. I said that confession.
Yeah.
Right.
Now, suppose I were to write about the heroic resistance of the Nazis to the Liberation Army, for instance, their use of torture, the use of mass reprisals.
I don't consider that heroic
Well,
at
why
all.
isn't that heroic? I mean, that means that they were doing everything they possibly could.
No, I don't think that heroism
not?
doesn't. Well, then I think we do disagree on the use of language.
But
I don't think that reprisals against
we do know that
innocent
Viet Cong
populations
have used fire weapons to destroy whole villages, children, that they have disemboweled mayors and so on and so forth and hung them up and all that kind of stuff. Now, this is heroic, I understand.
No, that is not.
Oh.
That's depraved.
That's depraved.
In my opinion. Yeah.
So
but that's very, very marginal in Viet Cong.
Well, why is it marginal?
In fact, it's marginal. That's a question of fact. And
It's
this
a
is
question
what
of
we
fact,
argue, Now, the question, in fact, you know, it's quite, you know, I think there's perfect unanimity about this in the people who've studied it. For example,
I let this first long clip run because I found it was informative on both of their characters. This is kayfabe at its finest. Buckley has set up a long trap that he feels will ensnare Chomsky. Chomsky dances around it playfully, and Buckley descends to a threat of physical violence. Wasp perfidy. He maintains this affectation throughout, but it breaks at several times. He's angry. He cannot control his emotions. Man is driven by their emotions, and anyone who presents themselves as otherwise is lying to you.
well, but you see, there's a very big difference. I think, you see, if you want to, personally, I'm against all kinds of terror, no question. But if you want to understand the Viet Cong situation, then let's recognize a very great distinction, at least I recognize. Let's see what the political point of the terror was. See, after all,
it is not always easy to taxonomize military action into that which is terroristic and that which is purely a military operation. We are left with doubts, for instance, about the bombing of Germany in 1942, 43, 44. You might contend that this was terroristic and unnecessary, and you might be right, although you're not a military expert, neither am I. But I think
there's a point to that.
Yeah, but I do judge that even if we all agreed that what we did in Dresden was inexcusable, as a moral question, it's got to be understood in context of what was it that brought us to Dresden in the first instance.
Absolutely.
And what brought us to South Vietnam in the first instance, in my judgment, was clearly an uninterested, or I should say disinterested, concern for the stability and possibilities of a region of the world, to which we were committed by a series of
at what
alliances.
period do you feel that we had this disinterested relationship to Vietnam?
Right now.
No, at what period did we have it? Did it begin? Let's say 1951, for example, when when the State Department bulletin points out that we must help the French reconquer their former colony, and we must eradicate all Vietnamese resistance down to its last roots in order to reestablish the French in power.
Wish,
was that
to increase my vulnerability, I wish we had helped the French.
We did. We supported
but not
them.
Sufficiently. Not sufficiently.
Well, but
there's no point in helping somebody insufficiently.
It was hardly disinterested when we attempted, as you know, with tremendous support, in fact, to reinstate French imperialism in South Vietnam.
Now, it was disinterested in this sense, and I think this is an important distinction which you do touch on in your book. It's a disinterested act if my attempt to help, or your attempt to help a particular nation, is in order to spare you the possibility of a great ordeal in the future, which will harm you, your family, your children, your republic.
And in that sense, Nazi Germany was also disinterested.
Yeah,
so after all, Nazi Germany was conquering Eastern Europe
Correct.
only in order to advance the values of Christian spiritual civilization and to restore the Slavs to their rightful home and so on and so forth. Totally disinterested.
Look, I follow you. I follow you. But if you want me to pursue that digression, I will.
Okay.
But let's suspend it for a moment. Okay. I'm distinguishing that kind of disinterestedness between the kind of...
But that's not a kind of disinterestedness. You see, that's something which includes as a special case every case of military aggression and colonialism in history. It's all disinterested in your sense.
Well, all right, let me simply rest my case by saying that there is an observable distinction by intelligent men between a country that reaches out and interferes with the affairs of another country because it has reason to believe that a failure to do so will result in universal misery, and that country which reaches out and interferes with another country because it wants to establish Coca-Cola plants there and chase national banks and whatever and exploit it. Now, that is an observable
It's a conceptual
distinction.
Well, let's distinguish between a conceptual distinction and a factual
I'm
distinction.
prepared to do that.
All right, it is a conceptual distinction, but in actual fact, the history of colonialism shows that these two motivations can coincide.
Here again, we see Buckley's inability to operate historically or ideologically or politically. He characterizes the American intervention in Vietnam as disinterested, and also characterizes the North Vietnamese as expansionist and imperialist, which meets no historical records.
But it's practically every, I mean, there are exceptions, you know, probably the Belgians and the Congo are an exception, but by and large, the major imperialist ventures have been in the economic, in the material interest or in the perceived material
I'm
interest.
not interested in the mathematics of the, but I'm interested.
Let me finish.
You have already conceded that it's not merely a conceptual difference.
I say it is.
There are exceptions.
There are a few exceptions.
All right.
Like say
Okay. All right, let's talk about the exceptions then.
Well, no, but the exceptions are at the difference. No, wait a minute. The exceptions. I mentioned, for example, the Belgians in the Congo. There, they didn't even pretend to have a civilizing mission. There, it was pure material self-interest. These are the exceptions. There are, as far as I know, no exceptions on the other side. There are. I mean, maybe I've left out a case of history, but as I see the history of colonialism, the great massive cases are cases where a powerful country was working in its perceived material self-interest and was covering what it was doing to itself and to the world with very pleasant phrases about preserving Christian values or helping the poor benighted natives or one thing or another.
Again, we're comparing Nazi Germany and the firebombing of Dresden and our liberation of Germany to imperial conquests like Belgium, for instance. It's funny because Buckley is trying to make the point that there is an inconsistent application of this standard, this double standard that I was talking about, but he cannot, he's so beneath competition of Chomsky that he can't even follow that the example proves his rule about how colonialism operates, that colonialism is always advanced first as a civilizing, a liberating mission, and then is followed quickly by the forces of corporatism, business interests.
Not, but it is also true, and I think manifestly true, that there have been interferences with the affairs of other nations whose purposes were, in my judgment, manifestly benign.
For example?
Well, for instance, the Truman Doctrine.
Oh, I don't think that was manifestly benign at all. That was an attempt to
Well, the Greeks
develop an
benign. I think
the Greek situation was benign, not at all. We were
I
trying
say
to...
the Greeks' testimony is more interesting to me than yours.
Which Greek testimony?
The testimony
of the thousands of people who were thrown into jail and...
well, I grant not the testimony of the Greek communists who were beaten.
Or the Greek peasants who were...
Well, there again, is it a conceptual difference that between the person who desires a life under some kind of freedom and one who desires life under some kind of... under communism?
No, because there's no such opposition in Greece. There was a distinction between a very repressive regime, which we instituted in 1946, and another regime, I don't know what it would have been, that would have grown out of a victory of the so-called communists.
Is it the Greeks
let me tell you,
would
so
like the kind of regime which resulted
my assumption is that all intervention is imposed by any country. That is, I believe that quite generally...
Did we impose on the French when we liberated them from the Nazis? Was that an imposition?
We didn't conquer France. We moved the Germans
hell
out
we
of
didn't.
Just from an outside invading force.
We invaded
But we
France.
didn't conquer it from its own people. See, in Greece we were trying to conquer it from its own people.
But there you're willing to credit the anti-Nazis as their own people, but you're not in Greece willing to credit the anti-communists as their own people.
The German army was there. There was no outside army in Greece other than ours.
Buckley continually returns to this comparison of the liberation of France from Nazi Germany to the American intervention in Greece in the late 40s that led to the destruction of the communist parties there. It's embarrassing that one could even make such a comparison. But continually, Chomsky decries intervention by any imperial power. He continually says that he does not support Soviet support of military support, meaning military supplies of communists in Greece. This is not a double standard as William F. Buckley so stupidly puts forward, but is in fact a single standard that he does not hold himself to. And that if you are against interventionism and imperialism, that obviously you would have supported the Stalinist regime, and that you should have pushed for him to go all the way to the English Channel, conquer Paris.
Look, there are modalities of outside intervention.
But look, there's a very sharp difference between... just a minute, there's a very sharp difference
Laval was not a Nazi.
But Laval wouldn't have lasted for 5 minutes without the German army.
And nor would Makarios have lasted for 5 minutes without the help of Russian aid.
But wait a minute.
In fact, as you know, when Stalin got tired of Makarios, he pulled out.
But look, now let's be careful again. I mean, there's a difference between... First of all, I'm opposed to military aid to other countries, whether by us or by the Soviet Union. Well, let's come back to that because it's a more important thing. And that is that I'm even far more opposed to the imposition of regimes by foreign troops. Now, in the case of Germany, let's say, in the case of France, the Pétain-Laval government, the Vichy government, was supported by German troops. Had the German... they weren't throughout the country necessarily, because there was certainly indigenous support, but there's no question that if German military force had been withdrawn to the other side of the Rhine, then there would have been an overthrow of the Vichy government, and France would have had some different form of government. Now, in that case, our invasion of France was, whether one likes it or not, was in reaction to an occupying external force. It's just pure confusion to identify that with the case of Greece, when we were trying to liberate, we were trying to select the kind of society that Greece would have, and we were trying to save the rulers that we had designated as appropriate from their own population. There were no outside forces.
But don't you realize that in your book, and that's why you're not willing to be consistent in carrying out this argument, you're constantly talking about our satellizing of places like Cuba and the Dominican Republic and so on and so forth, and yet we never occupied them in the sense in which you're talking about.
Well, we never occupied the Dominican Republic. We sent 25,000 troops there in 1965 in an occupation.
No, I'm talking about I'm talking
well,
about
the American Marines were in there dozens of times since 1900.
I think you're being evasive, and I don't think you want to be.
No,
Let me ask you this. Is it possible?
It's not evasive at all.
Is it possible?
We just simply repeatedly sent troops to
Is it possible?
Nicaragua, the Dominican Republic.
Here again, we see Buckley unable to respond, unable to track history. I haven't included the most poignant bit of it, where Chomsky traps him on Greece Buckley says that there was communist insurgents in Greece before the Nazi occupation and confuses the history to an embarrassing degree. This was the leading intellectual of the right. There has never been since a public intellectual who had the gravitas that Buckley did. And he's a moron. He's a buffoon. You can see why we've ended up where we have, because they can't engage on an equal playing field like argumentation, like debate. They descend to threats of violence, as he did earlier, or insults without argument, as he does throughout. And being unable to recognize that the historical fact that the Americans invade and occupy the Caribbean as their imperial territory is evidence of just a bad faith arguer, and that the kayfabe should have gone further, and he should have been called such an illiterate, an ahistorical warmonger. I think insults are necessary in kayfabe, and that trying to engage with the WASP on their level of affectation, especially when you can't do it like Chomsky can. He is at all times emotionally hot throughout the argument. He can't maintain composure and control throughout. And so if you can't, go to the extreme kayfabe, insults.
Cuba, etc., etc.
Is it possible to satellize a nation without having an occupying army there?
Yes, it is.
All right, then there goes your French, your tedious French explanation.
Oh, not at all, because that doesn't happen to be the... You see, we're talking about a real situation.
Yeah.
We could talk about some ideal situation and, you know, have an academic discussion about it.
I'm saying, therefore, it is possible for North Vietnam
to
satellize South Vietnam, presumably, without even
it's logically possible, but
occupying
it
it
didn't
militarily in a formal sense.
Yeah, but it didn't happen, though. So there's
well,
no point
this is an
it.
argument considering which there are 2 points of view.
Well, let's discuss it then.
Historically.
Yeah, in fact, you see, there's much more, if you want to be serious about it, there's more evidence that South Vietnam tried to colonize North Vietnam than conversely. In fact, South Vietnamese commandos were going, military forces, regular military forces, were going north considerably earlier than the time when we even proclaimed that the infiltration began from north to south.
Did they bump into the refugees coming south?
The refugees were coming south were going in both directions, in fact, in 1954-55, and at least according to Bernard Fall, the commandos began going north in 56 or 57. The first claimed infiltration from the north was in 59, and that was South Vietnamese coming south. So if one wants to talk about, again, the real world, the first motion
the trouble is, your difficulty, Mr. Chomsky, is, in my judgment, you never know where neatly to begin your historical
well, you choose
sequence.
The point of beginning.
Well, the point really is that if you're starting to say that 1959 was a provocation because there were...
No, it wasn't a provocation. I say that's when we claimed that the provocation
I say, well,
began.
but how about the people who were going from north to south who were talking about the misery that had been brought about Ho Chi Minh and so forth?
When was that?
I mean...
Well, which people are you talking about? I don't know.
Well, I'm talking about Vietnamese, north and south. Your trouble, I think, is neatly captured in the remark made recently by Czechoslovakia, that Czechoslovakia is, after all, the most neutralist country in the world, since it declines to interfere even with its own internal affairs.
I'm afraid I don't see the relevance of that remark.
Well, the relevance is very simply that you start your line of discussion at a moment that is historically useful for you.
That's what I say, you pick the beginning.
Of the post-war world is that the communist imperialists, by the use of terrorism, by deprivation of freedom, have contributed to the continuing bloodshed, and the sad thing about it is not only the bloodshed, but the fact that they seem to dispossess you of the power of rational observation.
May I say something?
Sure.
Yeah. I think that's about 5% true, and or maybe 10% true. It certainly is.
Why do you give that?
May I complete a sentence?
Sure.
I mean, it's perfectly true that there were areas of the world, in particular Eastern Europe, where Stalinist imperialism very brutally took control and still maintains control. But there are also very vast areas of the world where we were doing the same thing. And there's quite an interplay in the Cold War. You see, what you just described is I believe, a mythology about the Cold War, which might have been tenable 10 years ago, but which is quite inconsistent with contemporary scholarship.
Ask a Czech.
Ask a Guatemalan, ask a Dominican, ask a person from the Dominican Republic, ask a person from South Vietnam, ask a Thai.
Well, obviously we can't get away if you can't distinguish between the nature of our venture in Guatemala and the nature of the Soviet Union's in Prague. Then we have real difficulty.
Explain to me the difference.
So throughout this video, I have tried to present why I was vulnerable to someone like Chomsky. Because when I saw this at 16, it was impressive that somebody could dismantle another who presented themselves so what seemed efficaciously at the time. Looking back, I was an abused child that I had never seen argumentation in the Oxford style, and that I could be so easily impressed. However, I think the point remains that in a propagandized world such as the NATO empire or the Imperial West, that entryists and pipeline candidates are useful to the communist project. I would not exist as I am without the introduction to ideas such as Chomsky's. And though I've gone far beyond them, and I am way to the left of Chomsky by now, I cannot help but feel a debt. But that debt has been paid with his help and benefit from the abuse of children that he was involved with the Jeffrey Epstein scandal. And so that is why I'm burying him today. But if you watch this video closely, what Chomsky says over and over again about authoritarianism is actually inconsistent, not held to his own standard. That when he talks about the terror of the South Vietnamese, he allows that, but he doesn't allow the terror of the Soviets in reprisals to imperialism. We make no excuses for the terror. The point of the terror is, in fact, the whole argument that if the terror is being used to repress people's rights and their prosperity and their peace and their progress, then that is criminal. But if the terror is being used to support that, then that is okay. Buckley meekly puts forward that the Americans believed that they were doing this, but can't even hold up to even the barest scrutiny that an anarchist, a anarchitty, a moron, a child abuser like Noam Chomsky gives. So we disrespect Chomsky on this channel. We should have before, but like I said, I had a soft spot for entryism because I view it as a way to grow the tent. A big tent is necessary to a successful political movement. He's in my tent. I'm not in his tent. But the association with such a perverse and bourgeois scandal such as Jeffrey Epstein is beyond the pale, is not tenable for any true communist. And so, yeah, he must be excised, and he must be excised so fully that it starts to affect his protege, Norm Finkelstein, who I have the most respect for, the utmost respect for. And we can't have popular intelligence being vulnerable anarchities with no ideology that will actually stop imperialism. And so even though the breaking point, the straw that broke the camel's back, was this Jeffrey Epstein scandal, what it should have been was his inability to hold himself to his own standards when looking at the Soviet empire, as he called it. Stalinism was justified. Stalinism did basically everything correct. I am a Trotskyist, and I believed that it was doomed from the outset, but the successes and the accomplishments of Stalinism are beyond dispute. Hundreds of millions brought out of poverty, hundreds of millions taught to read, hundreds of millions who never knew famine or want. This is a serious success. This is to be emulated. It is to be celebrated. And even though I have my own criticisms and I put forward that permanent revolution is required to prevent the stultification of bureaucrats and its fall to reaction eventually, that to criticize the Soviets as an empire is to be perfidious to the point of, or obtuse to the point of perfidious, I guess I should say. And I think that that must be on the table after the Jeffrey Epstein scandal comes out, that Noam knows what he's doing and has decided a long time ago to benefit personally in a way that he was not likely to see otherwise because of the time he was born in. I feel Noam would have been a great intellectual had he been born in a communist nation and wasn't reliant on personal courage to arrive at correct conclusions. But today we bury him. Thank you, and have a good day. Hello, you've made it to the end of the video. Thank you. This channel has one mission: to prevent civilizational collapse associated with climate change, to prevent 100 million refugees by 2035, to stop 7 billion from starving to death by 2075. And we will do this through one main vehicle. We mean to unite the Anglosphere. We will do this by convincing the Commonwealth of His Majesty King Charles III to apply for statehood as one. And then with this new power, we will be able to negotiate in good faith with the rest of the world on how to tackle this crisis. Thank you and enjoy.